One ordinary decision, made in less than 10 seconds, would stay with an American soldier for the rest of his life. The strangest part was that no medal ever recognized it. No official report ever fully explained it, and almost no one believed it happened when they first heard the story. She had every reason to walk away. In fact, every rule of war demanded that she should. But if she had taken just 3 more steps without looking back, a man she had never met would have disappeared into history without leaving so much as a name. Years later, when someone finally asked him what had saved him, he didn't mention a weapon, a commander, or even luck. He simply said, "A girl who refused to stop seeing people as human." The answer sounded impossibly simple, until the records, the witnesses, and one faded photograph began telling exactly the same story. By the spring of 1945, the war had stripped entire German towns of their familiar faces. Streets that once echoed with bicycle bells and church choirs now rested beneath drifting dust and uneasy silence. The air carried the smell of damp brick, old smoke, and earth turned over too many times. Every sunrise felt less like the beginning of a day and more like another test of endurance. 22-year-old Anna Weiss walked those streets with measured steps, a canvas satchel hanging from one shoulder. Before the war, she had studied basic nursing under a local physician, expecting a quiet life of caring for children and elderly neighbors. The war had erased those plans one season at a time. Her mother was gone. Her younger brother had vanished somewhere on the Eastern Front. Her father, weakened by illness, remained in the cellar beneath what was left of their family home, too frail to travel and too proud to complain. Every morning, Anna searched for anything that might keep him alive one more day. A clean bottle, a handful of dried herbs, a piece of cloth that could still serve as a bandage. Even a few potatoes forgotten beneath collapsed beams felt like a miracle. She moved carefully, listening as much as she looked. The silence after war was never truly silent. Loose shutters knocked against cracked walls. Wind slipped through broken windows with a sound almost like distant voices. Somewhere beyond the empty streets, engines rumbled and faded again. No one knew who would arrive next, or what uniforms they might be wearing. Anna tightened her coat against the cool morning air and stepped around a fallen doorway. Then she stopped. Beneath the whisper of the wind came another sound, so faint she almost dismissed it. A slow, uneven breath. Then another. Anna did not move. She listened again, holding her breath until the sound returned. It was weak, uneven, almost swallowed by the silence around her. Slowly, she stepped over shattered bricks and followed it toward the remains of a collapsed storage building where daylight slipped through broken beams in thin ribbons. Dust floated lazily in the pale light. At first, she saw only a weathered military jacket beneath fallen timber. Then a hand shifted slightly against the ground. The movement was so small that she wondered if she had imagined it. She knelt carefully, brushing loose plaster aside without making unnecessary noise. The young man lying beneath the debris could not have been much older than 30. His uniform was American. His face was pale beneath a layer of dust, and his breathing came slowly, as though every breath demanded more strength than he had left. One sleeve was torn, and a field dressing, hastily tied long before, had begun to loosen. His eyes remained closed. Beside him rested a helmet marked with a white star and a small photograph that had slipped halfway from an inside pocket. Anna hesitated before touching it. The picture showed an elderly couple standing in front of a farmhouse, smiling into bright summer sunlight. She quietly returned it where she had found it. Somewhere in another country, she thought, two parents were probably wondering whether their son was still alive. The thought arrived without permission and lingered longer than she wanted. She reached into her satchel and removed a small canteen. Only a few inches of water remained. It was supposed to last until evening for her father. Her fingers tightened around the cap. For a long moment, she simply looked at the stranger. Every warning she had ever heard echoed through her mind. He was the enemy. Helping him could destroy everything she still had left. Yet nothing about the man before her resembled the terrifying image described in years of propaganda. He looked exhausted, cold, alone. Another faint breath escaped his lips. Then, almost imperceptibly, his eyes opened. Clear blue met gray. Neither of them spoke. There was no anger in his expression, no demand, no fear. Only confusion, followed by the quiet realization that someone had found him. Anna instinctively stepped back, her heart beating faster than before. Behind her, carried by the morning breeze, came another sound that made her blood run cold. An engine, then another. Vehicles were approaching from somewhere beyond the square, growing louder with every passing second. The engines drew closer, their low rumble bouncing between broken walls until the entire street seemed to vibrate with it. Anna looked toward the narrow opening where sunlight reached the ruined building. She did not need to see the vehicles to know they would be passing within moments. If anyone searched these ruins, they would find the American soldier exactly where he lay. The decision she had been avoiding suddenly became painfully simple. She could leave now, and no one would ever question her. She could pretend she had never heard the breathing, never seen the photograph, never looked into those blue eyes. She closed her own eyes for the briefest moment. Then another memory surfaced, quiet but unmistakable. Her mother, standing in their kitchen years before the war, wrapping a clean bandage around the hand of an injured neighbor. A wounded person is never your enemy first, she had once said. They are a person first. The words returned with surprising clarity, as though they had been waiting for this exact moment. Anna opened her eyes again. "Can you stand?" she whispered in careful English. The soldier stared at her for a second before giving the smallest shake of his head. His lips moved, but no sound came out. She glanced toward the street. The engines were almost there now. There was no more time to weigh consequences. Kneeling beside him, she slipped one arm beneath his shoulder and gently helped him sit upright. He tried to assist, but weakness quickly overtook the effort. Dust drifted from the broken beams above as they moved inch by inch across the uneven floor. Every small sound seemed impossibly loud. The old cellar entrance at the back of the building had nearly disappeared beneath fallen stones, leaving only a narrow opening that most people would overlook. Anna remembered it from childhood, when merchants stored potatoes there through the winter months. With quiet determination, she cleared enough loose debris to widen the gap. Cool air drifted upward from the darkness below. She guided the soldier toward the entrance, stopping several times as he struggled to catch his breath. Neither of them spoke. Words would only slow them down. At last they disappeared beneath the broken floor just as the first military truck rolled past outside. Voices echoed faintly through the street. Boots crunched across loose bricks somewhere above them. Hidden beneath layers of stone and shadow, Anna remained perfectly still, one hand resting against the rough cellar wall, while the stranger beside her fought to remain awake. For several long minutes, the only sound either of them trusted was the steady rhythm of breathing that proved they were both still there. The footsteps above lingered far longer than Anna expected. Dust drifted from the old wooden beams each time someone crossed the broken floor overhead. Neither of them dared to move. The cellar smelled of damp earth, aged wood, and forgotten harvests. Somewhere in the darkness, a slow drip of water echoed against stone, measuring time more faithfully than any clock. At last the voices faded. The engines started again, growing quieter until the silence returned. Only then did Anna allow herself a careful breath. She struck a single match, shielding the tiny flame with her hand. Warm light revealed rows of empty shelves, broken crates, and a rusted lantern that no longer worked. The soldier remained where she had helped him sit, leaning against the stone wall with obvious exhaustion. His eyes followed the light rather than her face, as though he needed a moment to remember where he was. Anna knelt beside him and carefully examined the loose field dressing on his arm. Years of assisting the town physician had taught her to notice simple things first: cleanliness, warmth, breathing. She removed the worn bandage as gently as she could and replaced it with strips torn from an old linen towel she had carried inside her satchel. The cloth was not new, but it was clean. She poured a small amount of water over it before wrapping it firmly into place. Every drop she used meant one less drop waiting for her father upstairs. She never paused long enough to think about that. The soldier watched quietly before speaking in a voice little louder than the whisper of the match. "Thank you." His words were slow, careful, almost apologetic. Anna answered with the smallest nod. "Save your strength," she replied in hesitant English. Conversation could wait. Survival came first. She reached into her satchel again and found half of a small loaf of dark bread she had managed to collect the day before. Without hesitation, she broke it into 2 uneven pieces. She handed him the larger one and kept the smaller piece for herself. He looked down at it without reaching. Then he gently broke his portion in half and offered part of it back to her. Anna almost refused before realizing what the gesture meant. Neither of them wished to receive kindness they could not return. She accepted the piece with quiet gratitude. For several minutes they ate in complete silence, the sound of crust breaking between their fingers almost impossibly loud inside the cellar. Outside, the wind moved through shattered buildings with a low, steady sigh. The war still existed only a few streets away, yet beneath the ruined town 2 strangers shared bread, water, and silence, neither fully trusting the other, yet both beginning to understand that compassion often arrived long before trust ever could. Edit. Morning arrived quietly, announced only by a thin ribbon of pale light slipping through the narrow opening above the cellar stairs. Anna had not slept for more than a few minutes at a time. Every unfamiliar sound beyond the walls had pulled her awake. She climbed the worn stone steps just enough to look outside. The street remained empty. A bicycle leaned against a broken fence exactly where it had fallen weeks before. Pieces of shattered glass reflected the morning sun like tiny patches of ice. Satisfied that no one was nearby, she returned below carrying a small bucket of water she had collected from an old hand pump hidden behind the ruins. Daniel was awake. His color had begun to return, and the strain in his breathing had softened, though every movement still required effort. He looked toward the bucket before looking back at Anna. "You came back," he said quietly. She seemed surprised by the statement. "I said I would," she answered. He lowered his eyes with a faint smile that carried more gratitude than relief. While replacing the fresh bandage, Anna noticed something tucked inside his jacket pocket. It was the same photograph she had seen before. This time Daniel noticed her glance. He carefully removed it and handed it to her without hesitation. The edges were worn from years of being carried. "My parents," he explained. "Their farm is outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa." Anna studied the picture for a moment before returning it with both hands. "They look kind," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. "They taught me that every person deserves a chance to do the right thing." The words lingered between them. Anna looked away toward the stone wall. "My mother believed something similar," she admitted after a long silence. "She always said that if someone could still be saved, you should never leave them behind." Daniel listened without interrupting. For the first time since waking beneath the ruins, he realized the woman helping him was not acting out of obligation or fear. She was following a promise that had existed long before either of them wore the labels that war had placed upon them. The quiet understanding settled naturally between them. Outside, uniforms, flags, and borders still divided the world. Inside the cellar, none of those things mattered as much as clean water, steady hands, and simple honesty. Before Anna left to check on her father, she placed the remaining bread beside Daniel along with a folded blanket she had found upstairs. He looked at the small pile for several seconds before speaking again. "Why are you risking everything for me?" Anna paused at the foot of the stairs without turning around. "Because one day this war will end," she said softly. "When it does, I want to remember the choices I made, not the fear I felt." The routine they had quietly built over the past several days ended with 3 sharp knocks echoing somewhere above the cellar. Anna froze halfway up the stone steps. Nobody visited abandoned homes anymore. Those who still lived in the neighborhood had learned to keep their distance, speaking through windows instead of doors, surviving by remaining unnoticed. Another knock followed, louder than the first. Then came unfamiliar voices drifting through the broken walls. They were close enough that individual words could not be understood, only the unmistakable certainty that strangers were searching the street. Anna slowly stepped back into the cellar and looked at Daniel. He saw the change in her face before she spoke. "Someone is outside," she whispered. Daniel immediately reached for his jacket, instinct telling him to leave before his presence endangered her any further. He tried to stand without assistance, but after only a few seconds, he leaned against the stone wall, breathing carefully until the dizziness passed. He shook his head with quiet frustration. "I cannot outrun anyone like this," he admitted. Anna looked toward the narrow staircase, then back at him. "Then you are not leaving today." She crossed the cellar and noticed something she had overlooked before. Behind several old wooden shelves stood a recessed storage space built into the foundation, once used for preserving vegetables through the winter. Years of dust and forgotten crates had nearly concealed the opening. Together, moving slowly and without unnecessary sound, they shifted the empty boxes just enough to create a place where Daniel could remain hidden if someone entered the cellar. It was cramped and dark, but it offered one advantage. From the doorway, it appeared to be nothing more than another section of the rough stone wall. As soon as they finished, heavy footsteps crossed the floor above. Loose dirt sprinkled down from the ceiling. Someone was inside the ruined building. Anna quietly picked up the small bucket and folded blanket, arranging them near the stairs as though she had come only to search for supplies. A beam of daylight briefly appeared as the damaged cellar door creaked open. She climbed halfway up the steps before anyone could descend. An older man from a neighboring street stood at the entrance, carrying an empty sack over one shoulder. His eyes swept across the room before settling on Anna. "I thought I heard someone," he said cautiously. Anna forced herself to answer with complete calm. "Only me. I was hoping there might still be potatoes left down here." The man nodded slowly, though something in his expression suggested uncertainty. He glanced once more into the shadows before turning away. His footsteps faded, but the uneasy silence he left behind remained. Anna did not know whether he believed her. She only knew that from that moment forward, the greatest danger no longer came from distant armies. Sometimes it arrived wearing the familiar face of a neighbor who simply asked one question too many. The next morning arrived beneath a sky washed pale by thin clouds, but the uneasy feeling from the previous day had not disappeared. Anna noticed it in the way the neighborhood remained unusually quiet. No doors opened. No distant conversations drifted through broken streets. Even the birds seemed reluctant to settle among the damaged rooftops. She carried a small basket filled with dried herbs and returned to the cellar through the same narrow entrance she had used all week. Daniel was standing when she arrived, one hand resting lightly against the wall for balance. His strength had returned little by little, enough for him to take careful steps across the uneven floor without assistance. "You are recovering," Anna said with a faint smile. Daniel nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful. "Because of you." Before she could answer, a sharp whistle echoed somewhere outside, followed by hurried voices. They both looked toward the staircase. Moments later, another sound reached them. Several vehicles had entered the street. Unlike before, they did not continue past the ruins. Their engines fell silent. Anna climbed only 2 steps before stopping. Through a narrow crack, she saw several uniformed men speaking with residents who had gathered outside their homes. Questions traveled from one doorway to the next. People pointed in different directions. One elderly woman slowly raised her arm toward the abandoned buildings across the street. Anna immediately stepped back into the shadows. "They are asking questions," she whispered. Daniel understood without needing more explanation. He looked toward the hidden passage behind the shelves, then quietly shook his head. "If they search carefully, they will find me." Anna remained silent for several long seconds. Then she walked to the old wooden shelves and carefully pushed them back into place, concealing the narrow space completely. She brushed loose dust across the floor until no fresh footprints remained. Every movement was calm, deliberate, almost ordinary. When she finished, she turned toward Daniel. "If they come down here, do not speak unless there is no other choice." He looked at her with quiet concern. "And you?" She gave the smallest shrug. "I will tell them exactly what they already know." A slow knock echoed above the cellar. Then another, firmer than before. Someone called out for anyone inside to identify themselves. Anna inhaled once, smoothing the sleeves of her worn coat as though preparing for an ordinary conversation instead of a moment that might change both of their lives. Without another word, she climbed the stone steps alone while Daniel disappeared into the darkness behind the hidden wall, listening as her footsteps faded and the cellar door slowly opened above. The cellar door remained open for what felt like an entire afternoon, though only minutes passed. Daniel stood motionless behind the hidden wall, hearing nothing except distant voices carried through layers of stone. He could not distinguish every word, but Anna's voice never rose above a calm, measured tone. She answered each question without hesitation, never speaking too quickly, never allowing silence to betray uncertainty. Above him, boots crossed the wooden floor. One pair stopped directly over the cellar entrance. Another moved toward the collapsed back room before returning again. Dust drifted from the ceiling with every step. Then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the voices began to fade. A vehicle engine started somewhere outside. Another followed. One by one, the sounds disappeared into the distance until only the wind remained. Several long minutes passed before Anna finally returned. She closed the cellar door gently behind her and leaned against it without speaking. Daniel stepped from the narrow hiding place, immediately understanding that the danger had not completely passed. Anna looked exhausted. There was fresh dust across the knees of her coat, and her hands trembled almost imperceptibly before she folded them together. "They believed me," she said at last. "At least for today." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I cannot stay here any longer." This time Anna did not argue. She already knew he was right. Every extra day increased the risk not only for herself, but also for her father and the few neighbors who still remained. Together, they studied an old hand-drawn map that Anna remembered from before the war. A narrow creek ran beyond the orchards west of the town, leading toward farmland where military patrols rarely traveled because damaged bridges forced most vehicles onto the main roads. It was not a guarantee of safety, but it offered something far more valuable: a chance. They waited until evening, when long shadows softened the outlines of ruined buildings and the streets became almost empty. Before leaving, Anna handed Daniel a small cloth bundle containing the last of her dry bread, a canteen filled from the old hand pump, and a wool scarf that had belonged to her brother before he left home years earlier. Daniel accepted each item slowly, as though every gift carried more weight than its size suggested. "I cannot repay this," he said quietly. Anna shook her head. "You already can." He looked at her with quiet confusion. She smiled for the first time in many days, live well enough that this kindness reaches someone else. Neither of them reached for a handshake. Neither spoke another unnecessary word. In the fading light, they simply nodded, two strangers who no longer saw uniforms before they saw humanity. Then Daniel disappeared into the evening, following the narrow path toward the creek, while Anna remained beneath the broken doorway until he was no longer visible against the quiet horizon. Nearly 8 months passed before Daniel Carter found the courage to return. The war had ended, but peace did not arrive all at once. Roads were repaired before hearts were. Buildings rose slowly from broken foundations, while families searched through endless lists of names hoping to find someone who had survived. Daniel had remained in Europe as part of a military relief unit, helping distribute medical supplies and food to towns that had once been battlefields. He carried many memories from the war, but one returned more often than the others. It was never the sound of engines or the sight of ruined streets. It was a quiet cellar beneath a shattered building where a stranger had divided her last piece of bread without asking who deserved it more. When his duties finally brought him within a day's drive of the town, he requested permission to stop. No official record mentioned Anna Weiss. No military report contained her name. He found her only because an elderly shopkeeper remembered a young woman who had cared for sick neighbors even after losing almost everything herself. The man pointed toward a small building that had once been a schoolhouse. It had become a temporary clinic where volunteers treated children, older adults, and anyone else who needed help. Daniel paused outside the doorway before stepping inside. Anna stood beside an open window, carefully wrapping a fresh bandage around the wrist of a little boy who smiled despite the worn condition of his clothes. She looked older than he remembered, not because of the passing months, but because responsibility had settled gently across her face. When she looked up, recognition arrived quietly. Neither of them hurried forward. Neither seemed surprised that the other had kept a promise. Daniel removed a small cloth bundle from his coat. Inside was the faded photograph of his parents standing beside their farmhouse. Behind it rested another picture taken only weeks earlier. The same farmhouse still stood. His parents were older, but they were smiling again. Anna looked at both photographs before handing them back with the same care she had shown the first time she touched them. Daniel thanked her once more, but the words still felt too small. Anna simply shook her head. "Then keep choosing kindness," she said softly. "It always travels farther than we can see." Years later, Daniel would tell his children that the most courageous person he had ever met never wore a medal, never commanded troops, and never asked to be remembered. She simply refused to let war decide who deserved compassion. History often celebrates the loudest victories, but the quietest ones are the victories that endure. Some people change the world without raising their voices. They simply raise the standard of what it means to remain human.